And we're back. Our guest for this segment is Deputy Chief Jonathan Brooks with the Tulsa Police Department. It's good to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's truly an honor and a pleasure to be here.
Is Jonathan okay?
Yes, it is.
Makes us a little more informal.
Yes, yeah, that's kind of what we prefer. Let's get the formalities out of the way and let's get down to first name so we can just talk and have a good conversation.
You and I were talking just before we started taping here about the dangers that the men and women in the force face day in and day out. And I have said repeatedly, I ought to get a tag that says I wouldn't have their job for love or money. I mean, it's a tough business.
It really is. The job is so difficult sometimes. The dangers that they face day in and day out, the pressure of society right now, that alone is enough. But as I said earlier, you know, sometimes it's just the things that they see day to day, you know, the average person isn't meant to see. The violence and the hatred that people have on one another and how they carry it out. And being exposed to that time and time again on a crime scene or at a traffic collision, it does take a toll. And that's why that our officer wellness is such an integral part of the officer staying healthy physically, mentally, and all those aspects so that they can be effective in what their passion is, because that's what it comes down to, doing this job. There has to be a passion for helping others.
Let me pursue this line for just a minute. There was a time when toughness was what you looked for. Thick neck, quick draw, no questions asked, go through the door. That's all changed. The whole concept of law enforcement has changed. Now, folks such as yourself recognize the importance of community policing, and that the problems that you guys see on the street are really just symptoms.
That's right. That is exactly right. We kind of call that the Joe Friday, the policing of old days. Nothing but the facts, ma'am, you know, and just getting the immediate problem solved. What we've learned is, as society has changed, we have to adapt and change with it. And so we don't want to just treat the symptoms or what we see on the surface, right? We want to solve the actual problem, get down beyond the facts, and why does this keep happening? You know?
Which brings me to another thing I wanted to bring up too. There was a meeting recently, actually a movement that started to get input from the public on how can we all get along a little bit better. And out of that came I think only one or two lines, and nobody picked up on it. I mean, you got to be my age before you pick up on things like this. But they were talking about how critical the home environment is to the folks that are actually breaking the law, and the recognition of mental illness.
Oh, yes.
I mean, you can't solve those problems. You're left to clean up the mess and solve the crimes. But clearly, through community policing, you're going to hear a cry for help. You're going to see things that need to be addressed. Can we expect the police department then in turn to become more political and say, hey, we got to do something about this?
Well, that's the most difficult question, is the police department becoming political. That is an area that we want to stay away from. What we want to be is the problem solvers and the helpers. So when you mention the home environment and what's going on there, that's why we've become so active in the schools now, trying to get reacquainted with these children, because we have to have a meaningful impact in their lives outside of a law enforcement action. And that means let's interact with them like you and I are interacting right now, instead of on a crime scene or instead of having to arrest somebody because there was a fight, right? And then you mentioned mental health. One of the biggest burdens that's been laid on police departments, not just the Tulsa Police Department, but police departments across this state because of the mental health issues. We have become very innovative in the way we're going to deal with those mental health. In fact, we ran a pilot program not too long ago. We call it the Crisis Response Team, right? It's not done very often, but we're trying it out, where an officer partners with a clinician, a social worker, and a paramedic, okay? And so instead of doing what was always been done with them, and I'll go back to treating those symptoms, is take them to the hospital or take them to jail, right? That's what would happen. But now we want to treat them in their home. We want to keep them in their familiar and safe environment. Make sure that they're under the we partnered with a hospital to make sure that we can take care of their medication issues at home instead of just typically what police would do. You go put handcuffs on them and then you take them to a hospital or jail. Well, that's so traumatic, not only them, but their families. So we have to take a different perspective on how we look at everything.
All right, given that, recently law enforcement here had a get-together, if you will, where badges were joined from several agencies. They went out, they went through doors because they were arresting gang members, they were confiscating weapons, they were taking in drugs, they were serving warrants. You got a lot of things off the street, but the gang element's still with us. That's going to be a problem, isn't it?
Oh yeah, of course, because that's what we're fighting in the schools, that's what we're fighting in the homes, because the gangs and the gang element is the ones that are recruiting these young kids and teaching them these criminal ways of living their lives, right? And that's what we want to change. And that's why we want to be so hard on violent crime. The gang members with guns, that's what we were targeting on that task force.
I have to tell you, when I drive at night, if I have to make a trip, say from here to Fort Smith, Arkansas and back, I'm worried about two things: deer out of nowhere and hate radio. And I hear it every time I'm behind the wheel. And I'm thinking, you know, we've got hate radio, we got hate television, we got hate motion pictures, and yet I go over here to Booker T. Washington High School and I see children, black, white, yellow, green, brown, whatever, they're fine with everything. Race is not a problem for them. Not really. I see a same age group that doesn't smoke because they see, they are aware what smoking can do to you. That all tells me that the best answer to what our ills are right now is going to have to start with the very young.
That's where we've put a lot of our investment into the young. And when I say young, I'm talking about preteens even. Don't wait till they're a teenager in high school. We've worked with them, but now we want to go even further back because what we're realizing is those impressions need to be set early on. We can show them that being a police officer can be a respectable profession. It goes against some of that hate. And that's one of the hardest things for us to deal with is all the hate that's out there, right? Because we're in a position, when I mentioned earlier, we can't be political, so we have to protect everyone's rights, and that includes your freedom of speech and somebody else's freedom of speech, regardless of, sometimes it seems hateful, but we have to walk that straight line where we're protecting everybody's rights in as well, even if it may go against what we personally believe or not.
I'm in my mid-70s, and I don't recall any time in my life seeing as much hate as there is right now in this country, not just Oklahoma, but from coast to coast and border to border. It's out there. So it's a major problem. What do you, and we got about a minute left, what do you suppose will be should be the main thrust of the officer on the street when they are called to a domestic dispute, possible shooting, somebody with a weapon, any number of things that could be potentially incredibly violent? How should they approach it?
How should the officer approach it? Our officers are highly trained. We're one of the most educated police departments in this United States, in Tulsa. Every one of our officers is required to have a bachelor's degree. And then they go through over 1,000 hours of our training in our academy, plus an additional training in the field. So we train them exactly how we want them to be. First, they walk in, they treat everybody with respect that deserves respect. They're excellent investigators. They're excellent mediators. They wear so many hats. They're advisors, counselors, they're doctors. I mean, they're serving all these multiple roles. So what they do is they're put in situations to quickly assess. And so that's their job. And but it all comes down to this: treat everybody the way you'd want to be treated, with compassion.
Push community policing. I mean, that's the answer.
It'll go a long way for us. Now, that doesn't say that people are not going to go to jail, because that will still happen. Because when a crime is committed, that's still part of community policing. Community policing is about working together to stop the violence.
And to reach the very young. Jonathan,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you, my friend. I
Yes,
really
thank
do.
you.
Well, you've heard of community service and the Community Service Council. But what exactly is all that? We'll find out when we come back.